Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 4, No-Win Scenario. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Picard, so I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Picard up to Season 3, Episode 4. If you have not seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, when I saw the title of this episode was No-Win Scenario, I'm like, oh. So we're just going to spend the entire episode with everyone thinking they're all going to die and dealing with, how do we face death and how they face death and the different things that affect them. And my reaction to that was, I guess. I just feel like this is something we've seen a lot before, particularly in Star Trek. And so I wasn't really that excited to get a full episode of them just, wringing their hands and acting like what's going to happen if they all die. Now, the episode did start that way, and I did sort of feel like, this is the same old BS. But, to be fair, I think the episode as it continued was really interesting. To me, the highlight of this entire season, actually, is the Jean-Luc Picard having a son storyline, which I think they're doing very well and completely justifying. So that aspect of the episode I found really interesting. Some of the stuff with Shaw, I'm a bit, I don't know. I'm a bit iffy on this thing because they're just repeating the Benjamin Sisko storyline from Deep Space Nine, and and some of the rest of the episode, it did move very slow. We got no scenes from the Worf and Raffi storyline, which really disappointed me because that was my favorite storyline, as I talked about last week, and I was kind of sick of them being in this nebula, and this entire episode was, them being in a nebula. But hey, they're out of the nebula by the end of the episode, so it only took them 3 episodes to get out of that damn nebula. But at least they're out of it now, and so the rest of the season we can move on to different storylines. But I don't know if I'm still sold that we need an entire episode of them wringing their hands and thinking they're going to die. But it was still a good episode. It was still entertaining. So we start the episode with a flashback, which I actually like this flashback. I think there's one thing I do like about Picard Season 3 is that I like the way they're utilizing the flashbacks as a framing device. And we see Picard trying to, enjoy his meal, but a bunch of young Starfleet cadets or ensigns, I'm not sure which, but they were young Starfleet officers, go up to him and ask him all these questions, and they ask him about fighting the Hirogen. I'm like, the Hirogen? And when they first said that, I was like, what? What do you mean Hirogen? But then they threw in, how they somehow made it to the Alpha Quadrant. Did you ask Admiral Janeway on advice? I was like, now I want to see this. Now, I'd be honest, I'd rather be watching this story of Picard and Worf fighting the Hirogen than the actual episode we got. But that's just me, because that actually sounds cool, I gotta say, seeing Worf fight the Hirogen. But anyway, so. And then as they show the return to the flashback later on, and then he brings up Darmok, of course, gotta give some fan service, reference some episodes we do know. And then he talks about this shuttle incident he had with Jack Crusher, not his son, but Beverly's first husband, and that comes up later when he talks to his son Jack Crusher and explains that they got caught because they were just snuck out to get laid. Which is kind of an interesting story to choose to tell your son, but I like that scene. I think that actually did add a lot of flavor to the characters and sort of explain everything. And I did like the framing device, how Picard's what he told the cadets was, the only reason we got out of this was because we worked together as a crew. So it did kind of telegraph what would happen in the episode, because the episode begins with Riker being pissed off with him, and everyone being disjointed and low spirits and low morale, and everyone sort of just being at their lowest. And so it kind of made it clear that they're going to work together to get out of it. But I still felt like it worked, even if though it was a little bit on the nose. And I did actually like when 7 of 9, when she went to Riker about the changeling, he said don't make this public because morale is low enough as it is. I actually agree with him. I actually think that's a good call, because everyone's worried about being crushed by a nebula. They don't need to have to worry about a changeling on top of that. I mean, you could say it kind of makes them more vulnerable to the changeling, because that one dude does die when 7 tries to scan the bucket. And by the way, I thought the bucket was just an Odo thing. I feel like that wasn't a changeling thing. I feel like the changelings, and I think this is something the female changeling talked about, is that they can regenerate wherever the fuck they want. They don't need to go in a bucket. Odo was just doing that for to be more private, because he was kind of ashamed because he was different than all the solids, and he wanted to hide his true form, where the changeling, especially Lost, you remember Lost from season 7, he would just regenerate wherever the fuck he wanted because he didn't care. I feel like, but of course, if you're an infiltrator changeling and you don't want people to know you're a changeling, then obviously you would want to keep it hidden. But do they actually need a bucket to do that? I suppose it might help them. But it's funny that the bucket they had looked exactly like Odo's bucket. Why was there a specific design for changeling regenerating bucket? I don't know. And plus, for Shaw to make that assumption is well, they have to regenerate in a bucket. Well, just because Odo did it doesn't mean all changelings do it. Stop stereotyping, Shaw. Come on, don't be a bigot. But but anyway, so. But yeah, so the whole scene where the changeling appeared and vaporized the bucket, how convenient to take that avenue away from 7 of 9, and that other guy got killed. I wonder if so the doctor must have known about the changeling, because they charted in the body of that innocent guy that the changeling was impersonating. The doctor could tell that the body had been dead for weeks, and they'd seen that guy around, so maybe she knew about the changeling. And then when that other guy got killed, what did they tell people how that guy got killed? Or maybe they kept that under wraps, only the doctor knew. Maybe the doctor was the only one that knew about the changeling. I don't know. But anyway, so there's the whole scene in the holodeck, and so when Picard goes to talk to Jack, and I like this because Riker was you only got 4 hours left to live, so I'd spend those hours with getting to know your son. And so Picard takes that to heart and actually goes to do that, and he goes to talk to Jack, and I thought that was a really, I was looking forward to that. I was like, yeah, this is a great idea. And then he takes him into the holodeck, and my first reaction of seeing them walk into the holodeck and recreating 10 forward, and Picard's like, oh, this is my favorite place to go. I'm like, no, it's not. It's just some bullshit from season 2 of Picard. You would have created 10 forward from the Enterprise but anyway, sorry. That's the whole 10 forward thing still pisses me off. But when they walk into the holodeck, my first thought was, how the fuck are they wasting energy on a goddamn holodeck when they were talking, like, one of the main plot points of this episode was how they had no energy. They were losing power, and they were losing power throughout the ship. They had to divert. They barely had enough power to operate life support, and they didn't have enough power to operate, like, impulse engines, and they needed more power for the shields. And then they're using a fucking holodeck. Now, they do try to address this later, because that was my first thought. But then later, I think they knew people would be thinking that, because they should be thinking that, because it makes no fucking sense. So they threw in this BS line where I think it was Picard that mentioned, I think it was Picard that mentioned, oh, well, don't worry, the holodeck has its own power generator just for situations like this, so people can come in and raise their spirits. No, that doesn't make it better. Just because the holodeck has its own independent power generator, why don't they shunt power from that independent power generator that's wasting time for people to go and have a drink at a bar, and use it to save their fucking lives, to boost the shield, or help the thrusters, or make life support function. But no, they have to have an independent generator just so people can go have fun in a fucking holodeck when their lives are at risk. I don't excuse it. That line does not excuse it. This is the dumbest thing ever. Particularly when that's a main plot point of the episode, is how they're losing power. And at the end of the episode, when when they were pretty much ran out of power, and they needed power to get out of the nebula, and Riker had to take power from life support, and they made such a big deal, like all the flashing lights, and you see people throughout the ship, it's like, warning, life support is off, which is a nice touch that I like, by the way, that they would warn everyone on the ship that there's no oxygen pumping anymore. Makes a lot of sense. And my question is, what are the inertial dampers still on? Don't they take power? It seemed like they could have been floating up in space, but I guess didn't want to spend their budget on that, creating a zero-G effect. But anyway, not as cool as The Expanse. But anyway, so my thought when Riker said, divert power from life support, I was like, hey, Riker, why don't you take that independent power from the fucking holodeck and use that to boost the power? Or if you can't do that, maybe that's a dumbass. It shows how stupid that is, to have an independent source so people can go have fun in a holodeck. Meanwhile, they got no air to breathe. Now, I know I can hear some nerdy responses to this being like, maybe the power from the holodeck wouldn't be nearly as much power that they needed. I don't care. Every power helps. Especially, I'm sorry, but a holodeck, creating an entire, holographic image, in drinks that they can drink, that's got to take some power. That is not an insignificant amount of power to use to do that. But anyway, so that really irked me. It's a bit of a nitpick, but it really bothered me. But that being said, I did still really like the scene, as I said, with Picard reconnecting with Jack, and I do like how they sort of hinted at it, where Picard's like, well, can you tell me why it is you've decided never to approach me? And he kind of evaded the question. It's like, no, actually, I'll tell you this fun story that has nothing to do with that. Because he didn't want to tell him, and then we see in the flashback Jack approaching him and Picard giving the exact wrong answer, saying, well, what about family? And Picard's like, well, Starfleet's the only family I need. That was powerful. That was a really good moment. And I do one day make it seem like Picard is remembering this event when they're showing the flashback. But I don't know if that is the case. And if it is, it's kind of weird that all of a sudden it would just come to him, that he would just remember, oh yeah, that was the same guy who approached me 5 years ago where I said Starfleet was the only family I needed. Whoopsie. So I don't know, I don't know if that's what they were implying, that Picard was remembering that. But I still thought that was a really powerful scene. I thought it absolutely justified the flashbacks. Now, as for Shaw, as I mentioned earlier, I'm still not that big on this character. I don't really like that he's an asshole. I mean, it kind of makes it better that he's at least a self-aware asshole and talks about why he's an asshole. But the whole thing about him being angry at Picard because of Locutus Wolf 359. Actually, someone else predicted this. Someone else called this out, who hadn't seen these episodes, called it out earlier when a video I watched, saying, I bet you that guy is pissed off at Picard because of Locutus. And sure enough, and it's too predictable, I think, because it's been done before. They did on Deep Space Nine. Now, that being said, I did like the traumatic story that he told. That was really powerful, and it did show how he was still suffering from trauma, and that sort of enforced why he's been behaving like such an asshole. But I don't like the fact that he's directing it towards Picard. I don't like that it was a Wolf 359. We've gone to that well. Yes, everyone loves Best of Both Worlds. It's a fan favorite episode, we know, but I think we've gone to this well way too many times. It would have been actually at least a little bit more interesting to me if it was a different incident. Maybe it was First Contact, but then of course they wouldn't be able to direct his anger towards Picard if it was First Contact. But yeah, I feel like when they revealed that, I'm like, they've already done this with Sisko. And to be completely honest, I wasn't a fan of when they did that with Sisko as well, because it seems obtuse for the person to blame Picard for something that literally was not his fault, that he was abducted, that it's a trauma for him, and he was forced against his will to do things. It's like if trying to think of a comparable scenario. If say like during the Cold War, the Russians abduct a CIA, intelligence officer from the U.S. They capture him, he's just walking around minding his own business, and then sneak up behind him and put him in handcuffs and ship him on a plane to Moscow, and they torture the fuck out of him to glean information, give me the secrets, give me the codes, and they nearly kill him, and so he gives up the secrets, and then later he's returned to the U.S. And someone who died because of or was traumatized because of the secrets that he gave away. Actually, now that I'm talking about it, I feel like there would be some assholes out there that would blame him, but that's ridiculous. But here's the big thing, though. This is modern day I'm talking about. In Starfleet, 25th century now. They're supposed to be a bit more advanced beyond this. Now, I know not everyone's on board with the whole Roddenberry vision of them being more advanced and more beyond that, but it still seems, and maybe I am looking at this from the perspective of someone who watches Jean-Luc Picard on TV on a weekly basis, who likes him and sees him as a hero, but to me it still seems obtuse and absurd for them to blame Picard for something a trauma that he experienced that clearly was not his fault. Now, and actually that scenario, that that I gave isn't actually a good full analogy, because in that case the guy had the intelligence officer did break down and succumb and be like, give him the secrets, where in this case Picard actually didn't break down. He had zero choice. They used technology to suck it. So maybe a better analogy would have been like if they had some fantastical device that just sucked the information from his brain and he gave no consent at all. That would be a better analogy. But anyway, so yeah, Picard, to blame him for it is ridiculous. And okay, I can somewhat buy it. It's not like I completely don't buy it. I just don't like it. Just to be clear, I can buy it, but I don't like it. And I didn't like it with Cisco, but I was willing to go with it because it did something good with it here, or with it there. But here, they're just repeating what they've already done, and something I wasn't that on board with before. So I'm not willing to give it that leeway that I was with Cisco. And here's the other issue I had with this, is that it also explains why he doesn't like 7 of 9 and forces her to use her name Hansen, and because he has this bias against the Borg. So why did Starfleet assign a former Borg as a first officer to a captain who is clearly still traumatized by his events with the Borg? It seems like a really dumb idea. Now, before anyone makes any comparisons to modern day, again, let me reassert, this is not modern day. This is not the U.S. military. All right, this is Starfleet, a totally different organization. Now, there's been all these arguments and discussions about whether or not Starfleet is a military, and some people insisting from Roddenberry's vision that they absolutely are not a military, and other people pointing out to all these examples where they use ranks and they use military shorthands a lot of time, that they are a military. And here, I actually don't care. I never came with a conclusion myself, because here's the conclusion I have. Yes, it's Roddenberry's vision that they weren't a military, that they were just explorers, but he wasn't the only writer who ever wrote for this franchise that's been going for 60 plus years. There's many other writers who come on board who sees people with the rank of captain and commander and say, this is a military. And one of the biggest examples is Star Trek II, something that this show is taking huge influence of, where Nicholas Myers went out of his way to portray Starfleet as a military, and using a lot of traditional military traditions. And so this whole argument of whether or not Starfleet is a military is kind of moot for me, because yes, some writers think it is, some writers think it isn't. So I tend to be like, yeah, it is. They're definitely especially they were the department that handled the war in Deep Space Nine, Dominion War. So yes, they are definitely a military, but I also feel like they are not what we would. They don't behave in the exact ways that military functions in present day. They're not. They're something a bit more of a mutation, something a bit more beyond than simply just the military. There is this, and all those arguments aside, anyone who's seen Next Generation can see that Starfleet is a much more touchy-feely organization than what we think of as modern-day military. I mean, they had a counselor on board who always talked about people's feelings, and they had kids running around the ship. So it was definitely, despite what some writers tried to make it, different than just the flat-out military. And so I don't buy that a touchy-feely organization like Starfleet would be as reckless as to assign someone who was a former Borg as the first officer to a captain who has a hatred towards the Borg stemming from a trauma that he suffered. I don't buy it. I just don't. It seemed very plot convenience, plot contrivance to me, and I can already see the story where they're gonna probably go in the end of the season, where he's gonna come to appreciate Seven of Nine more, and it's gonna help him get over his trauma. But it all seems a bit contrived to me. Now, then we get the scene at the end where Shaw, who was injured and confined to his quarters, but now all of a sudden is fixed in the nacelles, but he still has Riker in command for some odd reason, even though he's the captain of the ship. Don't ask. Because he's a grease monkey. That's another... I mean, maybe they could use the term colloquially by this time, but there's no grease involved in engineering anymore. So, again, and maybe they use that term colloquially and it just survived. There's a lot of colloquial terms we use nowadays that aren't relevant anymore. So, okay, fine. I can kind of buy that, but whatever. Anyway, so he goes to fix the nacelle, and they're gonna keep an eye out for the changeling. And they're like, oh, the changeling's gonna want to interfere. This would be the perfect situation for the changeling to come in and interfere. Why? What does the changeling? Is this changeling suicide? Maybe it is, because there's not suicidal bombers and stuff like that, but. I thought that the mission of the changelings was to kidnap Jack Crusher. Like, we see that the what's her face, Varric or whatever her name is taking orders from changelings. By the way, that was a pretty cool scene when she cut off her hand and turned into changeling, and then it went back in her hand. It's weird, but anyway. And they're all like, you have to, I don't care if you die, if your crew dies, we need Jack Crusher. Then why is this changeling willing to just let Jack Crusher die? That doesn't make any sense to me. It seems like this changeling would want them to get out of the nebula alive so that Jack Crusher could live so they can capture him. But, okay, let's set all that aside. And so, yeah, 7 of 9, it was like, and Shaw agreed, oh, well, we should keep an eye out. The changeling are definitely going to come. And then Ensign LaForge shows up, and they should have been like, changeling! Immediately. Now, that's even before, like, that's what I thought, even before they revealed that 7 of 9 called Riker and said, don't send anyone down here. Especially then, they should have instantly known it was a change. Now, they don't want to, like, kill someone willy-nilly without being 100% sure they're a changeling. I get that. But couldn't they stun? I don't know if stun has an effect on changeling. It was certainly reveal it's a changeling at the very least. But anyway, it was beyond obvious it was a changeling. But they had to have this callback to earlier scene where Shaw told 7 of 9 what a changeling wouldn't really know, your history and whatnot, so personal information, so that's the way to find them out. That's actually not consistent with Deep Space Nine. In Deep Space Nine, this changeling impersonated Bashir for months, and he was able to get away with it because he knew all this personal information about Bashir. He was able to act and behave and have the same mannerisms as Bashir, and not to mention the one who imitated Martok for over a year and got away with it. So I feel like the changelings, and that's the whole point of the changelings, has seen in Deep Space Nine, is that they had this great intelligence network, and they were able to gather all this intelligence, and that way they knew every tiny little detail as to be able to impersonate someone to totally get away with it. Now, you could make an argument that in the situation with like Julian Bashir or Martok, it was a particular changeling who was imitating one person long term, so that they would have studied hard out to imitate that one person for a long time, where this changeling was going around randomly imitating random people And so it would probably be impossible for them to know all the personal information to that close of a detail of everyone on the ship. So you can say that, and I do get that it is like a hard sell that they would gather that much information to know that LaForge called 709 Commander 7 and not Commander Hansen. But yeah, but the said, oh yeah, this is the particular weakness of the changeling doesn't seem particularly to hold true. But anyway, and yeah, it was obvious that was the changeling, and she killed the changeling, and then they, Crusher figured out that they were on that the things they were experiencing in Nebula was like similar to birth, and saying that there was like the Nebula was actually giving birth, and they even called out, oh, like at Farpoint. There's also Galaxy's Child. Excuse me. I sound like such a nerd now, but hey, I'm doing reviews of Star Trek. Of course I'm a nerd. But anyway, because that's another example of a spaceborne creature. And they didn't mention that. They had to mention Farpoint because that's the first episode and more people know that. And it's in the episode title. But if they said like, oh, like those creatures from the name, whatever the name of that damn asteroid field was in Galaxy's Child, no one would know what that means. But anyway, are they trying to say that these things are the same creatures from Encounter Farpoint? I thought maybe they were, but I don't think they are. They did look really similar, the way they were glowy like that. But that seemed really like they tried to make it like, oh, isn't this amazing? Oh, wow, this is why we're out here to discover new life forms. But it's kind of irrelevant to everything that's going on. And it seemed kind of thrown in there and unnecessary. And plus, like, having the starship being trapped in a nebula that actually turns out to be alive, something done before. Again, get my nerdy hat on. Excuse me. It was actually done in Voyager, in the episode of Cloud, and it seems like it's something that's been done a lot. And there's space creatures and there's a nebula. It's a typical Star Trek fare. Now, the fact that they don't focus on it really heavily does make it better, but still, it also makes it kind of. And it was kind of maybe hinting and nod, we're being like Star Trek. I don't know, I could do without the cliches of Star Trek, honestly. But anyway, my rating for No Win Scenario out of 10 is going to be a 7. Very good. Despite all my complaints about this episode, I did enjoy it, particularly the character stories with Picard and Jack. I also like what they did with Riker and him contacting Deanna and not knowing, and thinking he was going to die, and at the end, being able to sort of, clear things up with her. That was good. And other character moments, I like the framing device with the flashback. The Captain Shaw thing I didn't care for that much, but 7 of 9 hunting the changeling was an added element of suspense that I like. So, a decent episode. I am still not totally sold on Picard like many others seem to be. I know I'm not the most cynical. I know there's some reviewers out there who are more cynical than I am, or just as cynical, but I feel like I should call my Picard reviews the cynics, the cynics' perspective of Star Trek Picard, because I think a lot of people are more willing to go with it and go with all the nostalgia, but maybe I'm just more reserved for being burned by the first 2 seasons, especially the second one. So, I'm a bit more cynical on this, but I'm still enjoying this, way better than season 2. Not that that's a high bar, but at least it is. I was afraid before the season started that it would suck just as much as season 2, so at least that fear is gone. But, I still don't think this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, but I'm still enjoying it. So that is it for my review of episode 4, season 3 of Picard. I will be back next week and every week hereafter to cover the rest of Picard season 3. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.